Since I've came back, the question I have been asked more than anything somehow in the comments of my videos is how to set up bows, what synergy works with them, and how to incorporate it in with Bowmen. And the title of this video is probably a pretty good indicator of where this video will go, but there are complexities to it, and the why will be more of the focus of what I talk about here. So, as stated in the title, female is primarily the build we see most often ran with bows. So we have weakness, bleed, and female as the three synergy types in the game that we can choose to run. And for the melee units at least, pure female is actually probably the lowest performing build of the three right now, for mid-spenders at least. Yet it's the reverse when it comes to bows. So the question then is, why is that the case? So if we look at weakness, for the melee units, you have Drake, Enzo, and Lats as the primary healing enablers for Jamie. He obviously needs healing on lineups to actually work. That's his only requirement for his synergy, is getting healing onto his units. And all three of these will give at minimum 65% weakness attack uptime on all lineups through the fight. Whereas with bows, there is just no equivalent for these three at all. There has been some speculation that maybe Egbert will be made into the healing equivalent of these for bows when he's awakened, but honestly, especially with Kravras, who I'll touch on a bit later, that build would be so overpowered and unhealthy for the game. Basically, all mid-spenders would probably have to run it if he was a direct equivalent for one of these. If he was like an Arslan equivalent or something, he wouldn't matter at all. But if he stacked healing on every bow lineup for 26 seconds or longer, that would be game-breakingly good, honestly, and I really hope that doesn't get added from a selfish perspective at least. So the only feasible source of healing for weakness for bows is the Dragon Assist Dragon skill. You can get healing through Arslan and Hector, but there's just no way you're going to make a functional weakness build with them, because one, they don't heal enough, and two, they just won't perform better than other alternatives that give actual useful stats to bows, obviously. So the lack of healing rules out weakness immediately. Bleed is a bit more complicated, because bows do actually function with a fair few things in the bleed build. So it actually works with Rhea, it works with Kevin, although at half the proc rate on the shields. The issue is that they don't work with Sonara, and Sonara is the main one you need to work with realistically for this build, because you can sort of use Kravras as like a budget version of Sonara for bows, but it just doesn't proc at the same rate realistically. You can see here I have the screenshot just proving that weakness can proc onto bows. I mean, it's probably pretty obvious, but it will only be Dragon Assist here, which you can reliably get healing onto bows with, and that will only affect one lineup, so it's just so negligible realistically that it just won't be worth using Jamie with a dragon with Dragon Assist alone. But I have a bunch of stuff in Kravras here I'll probably go into later, but the issue is that Kravras is so marginal in his effect of extra attacks when compared to Sonara, even without her weapon. I mean, when you have Sonara's weapon at 4-star, Sonara will generate 1,000% of the extra attacks that Kravras would, because it would be 2 times more attacks compared to 0.2 times. So stuff that requires extra attacks to proc, like Rhea, like Kevin, Kravras alone just won't be in the same ballpark as Sonara whatsoever. You need Sonara to get proper functionality out of that stuff, and it just doesn't work with bleed. There are certain things you can look over here that can work and potentially be hybrid in though. So like Rhea does cause bleeds from the normal attacks, The issue is, again, you just can't generate enough extra attacks for it to be worth it, especially when she doesn't give any bow stats. She gives a bit of total health, but it just isn't enough. John is a bit weird. You'll get the damage reduction, so that you'll receive this 15% damage reduction. You can see there it shows in reports. This is an all bow lineup, as you can see by the reinforcement troops there. So that the normal attack damage is applied, but this crit chance doesn't work in effect. It sort of implies it would with the non-front row troops, but you don't crit through John with bows at all. So it will only be the damage reduction through the start and then his passive total stats, which realistically isn't terrible, but there's no synergy applied to it at all, of course. You can't do anything because you can't crit, so you can't multiply his usefulness past just the raw value is bringing through his stats and the damage reduction, really. Kevin does work, and he does proc off the Kravras extra attacks, but like I said, it's not the same as Sonara. He doesn't proc enough to really be worth it. Plus, you will have a half proc rate chance compared to the melee unit alternatives. So that realistically, how you want to envision this is it's 30% chance to grant the shield, but it's a 15% chance for bows. I feel like it should be worded in reverse to how it's actually worded, and more so how I just said it, if that makes sense. Because you're always going to be running Imp or Cav with bleed realistically, so I'm not sure why it says it from a bow perspective, basically. It's just a bit odd to me. Barrett does proc his bleed with bows only, which is sort of funny. Merrill doesn't. You see here with Barrett. He doesn't have melee unit specific tooltips, but again, doesn't have any bow stats or total stats, so he just won't be usable. So whilst there are certain bits of synergy that work with bleed, the fact that Sonara doesn't work sort of invalidates all of that, really, because you just can't get enough bang for your buck for all the stuff that does slightly work. But then when we move on to female, everything female wants and needs works seamlessly with bows. With all these other alternatives, there are just huge catches. Jamie works, but he can't receive healing, so he's pointless. Rhea works, but Sonara doesn't, so Rhea's basically pointless. Female, though, the only real catch there is with female is that you want to run mono units to maximize your commander damage. And that can be slightly awkward with melee unit builds, because you'll sometimes want to run mixed troops, cover counters, and stuff like that. But with bows, that's actually perfect. That's actually your ideal regardless, because you want to funnel in all your stats onto bows and then run them so that they're your front line. So running mono unit bows is perfect. You're going to do that regardless of the synergy or trying to maximize your commander damage either way. So that's perfect. There's also a disproportionate amount of total stat commanders in the mid-spender bracket for female. So with weakness, you have your healing enablers. They're all single troop statted. You have Arslan, only spear stats. Hector, only spear stats. Even stuff like Julian, it's just Imp, Cav, Spear. There's nothing you can really use here to buff bows in any way. With bleed, there's a few things, like Rhea has total health. Patello has total health. Kevin is actually okay in terms of his buffs for bows. But there's no real attack stats you can use here. So Rhea and Patello have the health, but Kevin is the only one with attack. And you can't run Sonara with him, so it's basically pointless anyway. But then if you look at female, you have Layla, of course. I mean, all the other synergy types have their equivalent of Layla, so maybe that's unfair to use. But with Layla, you'll have Annie, who has total attack, total defense. You have Arya, who's actually free to play, so she's very, very accessible, and she has total attack. And you also have Marjorie, who's total health and total attack. And for bows, you really want to maximize the attack stat, because your base unit attack will be so much higher than the other unit types that the higher you scale that percentage, the better, even more so than for the other unit types. And female will help you achieve that best if you're trying to synergize. If you're trying to use commander synergies at least, because these commanders just give you the best route into scaling up your attack compared to the other types. You then also have the situation where most of the best bow attack stat givers are female anyway. Kravras admittedly is male and poses a bit of an obstacle for this, but Sansa is female and she gives 66% bow attack and 66% bow health. Sheila is female with a 66% bow attack. Melisandre is female and she actually gives 84% bow attack. If you look, what would it be? Here, leaking our memes channel slightly. Yeah, here. Where's Mel? Yeah, Mel there. 84% bow attack. So she actually scales way higher than normal. And the thing is, if you look at the male alternatives, there's like O'Bane. He only goes to 48%. He's more of like a economy passive commander, more than a PvP one. So his stats are terrible, and you don't want to run him in practice. Robert only gives bow defense. Again, terrible. Don't want to run him in combat. And of course, there's Egbert, who isn't awakened yet at the time of recording. I actually see Egbert ran a surprising amount, I guess because of his bow attack. But because he isn't awakened, he'll only cast his active twice in combat. And it's very, very unlikely that if you actually test things, Egbert will perform better than alternatives because his commander damage will be so low. The army size he's bringing is so low. I'd be very, very surprised if Egbert should be in your top 5 bow commanders that you're running in a lineup. Theon, to be fair, is good. Where's he? I'll show it back in here. Theon, he has very good stats for this build, admittedly, but he doesn't synergize with anything, which is difficult. Kravras is the big issue here, because he is male and he is very, very good. This 4-star ability, honestly, this might sound really stupid and controversial, but Kravras might be the best free-to-play PvP commander in the game, by quite a margin as well. He just has nothing that synergizes with him at all. If he did, like I alluded to earlier, and you could use him in a bow weakness build, I think it would be ridiculous, honestly, but because this ability is actually just absolutely crazy. Like, if you look at the numbers of him, here, I mean, it's pretty obvious when you read his skill, but he does literally increase your bow damage by 20%, basically. I mean, it is how the skill reads, but there's nothing else that will have such a raw damage increase as that does. And if he had things that synergized with that skill to like a larger degree than what he can do with the bleed stuff, because it just doesn't really work with bows, it would be so insane, because it adds so much damage. And even though he doesn't synergize with female because he's male, I do think it's probably too much of a damage increase to turn down if you're a mid-spender at least. If you have Cersei and Daenerys, like that changes things, because you could run just a full-on commander damage build with Layla, Salma, and then those two, and you just want as many active procs as soon as possible to keep proccing Wildfire. That just really changes your priorities. But at the mid-spender level, I think it's probably Kravras and then 2 more. So something like Layla, Melisandre, Arya, Annie, Kravras, something like that. I do think Salma, without the F5 commanders, probably isn't worth running with bows, honestly. Because she only gives total health. Her active won't give more active castings. That will only be giving extra active castings to 4-star Dany. And I do see Salma ran in a lot of these mid-spender bow builds. I'd maybe test that on the new Rebel groups or a Lord's Trial or something if that ever comes back. I might be totally off base, but yeah, I do think if you're running a 5 female build, maybe try swapping in Kravras for Salma, because I do think that would probably ramp the damage up, assuming you don't have Daenerys or Cersei, of course. And that's about that. Female is very much the pick for bows, both because they suit each other very well in what the synergies require regardless, but also because these other two synergy types just cannot accommodate bows at all.